Okay, so today what we're going to go over is using Google's Forms and Google Scripts. This is an easy way to help, allow for user interaction to through your website or through other means, and also to collect user feedback. It's a great tool, and I also wanted to show that it can be very useful for doing things like setting up email alerts, and also a quick and easy way to set up customer interaction or user interaction with your website and sending out email notifications. It's much easier than trying to do this manually on yourself from scratch, trying to set up email alerts and things like that, particularly if you don't already have an email server in-house. So if you're already using cloud services like Gmail, and this is a very easy way to send out information and collect user information. So what we have here is a fictitious coffee shop page. This is just, um, something that I randomly created using a bunch of HTML and CSS. Click about us. It's a fictitious dream of a coffee roasting business. So it's nothing more than that. I myself have an obsession with coffee. So this was the first thing I thought of when I want to create a fictitious business or website. So, but what I really want to focus on is contact us. So if we click here, you can see you have a form. You can enter things like your contact email address, what you're looking for help with, answer some more details, and all of this information can be extrapolated and developed using Google Forms. In fact, what we're doing on this web page, and we can view the source, is we have all this other text in HTML, which is all the stylistic stuff that's going on the website and the format of the website. But essentially, what you put into HTML is this iframe, and this is what comes when you create the Google Forms link. So once we have that inside Google Docs, what you can do is to create a Google form. We can just go to More, Google Forms. You can create an untitled form, or you enter a title for it. You can enter the description, and then you can start adding questions, and you can add more questions however you want. You can change if you want multiple choice checkboxes. That would allow multiple options to be checked. Drop down if you want to have that sort of option for you. You could do things like linear scale file upload, even short answer paragraph. But once you have this form created, you can then go through, select it, go into the set up the things like you can have it collect email addresses of people who are logged in and users. This is good, and we'll show it for a minute later if you need to ever feedback to, say, the user or the responder of the form. And you can set things like limit just to one response if you need something like voting or tallying for whatever you're doing. You can also set up things to work as quizzes. So particularly if you're like in the education sector, you can use forms essentially as a way to set up and run the quizzes, for students or something. This might be very good if you're a Google-oriented educational sector or school or something like that. And then once this is saved and you're ready to send it out, what you can do is you click the send button. In the send, you have the option to email the form to people, so you could just email it to a bunch of recipients. If you just want to send out a raw form, it'll send a link to all the people that you put in this email list. You can send the link. You just copy the link directly, send your own email. You don't need to send it from Google Forms itself. Or, and what we're going to show here is you can create this iframe. So this is exactly the same thing that we just showed here in the source. So you have this address here. And what this does is creating the iframe is kind of like setting a nested website. It's a way for the Google Docs form to appear within the context of another website. So as we see here on this contact us, and again, this is just a locally hosted random example page. It's not a true website or a true business or anything like that. But what we have here in this contact us is we have access to this form, and then with the access to this form, people can then fill in information, and we can get some more information, then post it back to us. So what I'm going to show here is sort of the workflow, how it works. And it's as simple as that. You fill out the form and then it goes off. Now what happens in the back end and what we set up, and this is going to be where we also come into things like scripts, is inside of your Google Documents, we should get an alert about the change. It could be here. You can see we received the response. See this update. And what we're going to do and what we're going to look at is making sure that we have a script which can then forward these alerts to our own email address so that we get alerted every time this information comes in. Now there's a couple ways to do this. So when you set up a Google form, what it does is under responses, it'll say you can auto generate a spreadsheet based on the criteria inside the form. So when you do that, you'll get something like what we have here, where you'll have a timestamp. This is the default. It always comes with most Google Forms. It'll ask you what we can help you with, the details. Then we'll have additional fields, like we added something like an email address. Let me just change this a bit, wrap that text, so that way it's a little bit more understandable. So you'll get email addresses from people at whatever email address they chose to enter. That's because when we set up the form, we inside this contact us, there's the option to submit an email address that allows for feedback or some form of customer contact. And then inside here we get the information, and then this information, even though it's in a Google Sheet, so it's essentially a spreadsheet, because Google Spreadsheets can be accessible to multiple users at the same time, and they can be scripted with messages to other email responses, and they're on the web, and they're always available. To an extent, what that allows you to do is to treat a Google Sheet somewhat like what a database will be doing in an enterprise scenario. So this is a cloud-hosted table where we can then enter information, save information, and then respond back and automate responses to certain information. So I'm going to go through here. Go look at this. Okay, I didn't get an email alert. So what I'm going to do is we're going to look at the code. And first thing that I'm going to do is say what we can do is we can set things in the Google Sheet. So say for example I'm the host, or I'm the owner of that said coffee shop. I want to make sure that I get notifications to my inbox every time someone sets up or pushes a new request over to me. That way I'm not having to constantly refresh this every 5 minutes to see if anyone got a response. What I can do is we can set a notification rule. So if there's a user submits form, we can set this. Every time it submits, we can say if I need a daily digest of these emails, or I need to get this email straight away, I can do this. That way I get notified when the form submits. The alternative, and what I've chosen to do, and there's a couple of reasons why I chose to do this, is I can save it like this. Done. And then when a user submits a form, okay, we have that submission. What this should do is send an alert as a customer submitted that. It might be an issue with the... It can sometimes take a minute for the dealers to go through. There we go. So we get the Google Docs response, so we get this recently edited button, and you can see exactly what was edited. So we say a user made changes, so that's exactly what they did. You can access the form and then just click the spreadsheet, and then it'll bring up the link to the spreadsheet so that you can actually view what had happened or what the new entry is. So that's one way of doing it. That's the easy way of doing it. There's another way, which is a little bit more complex, but for certain things maybe a little bit more usable, and you can script that response. So what we have here is a script, and I'm going to sort of walk through it. Is what this is doing is allowing us to send out a collect information from the sheet, then issue a response to this email address. This is the email that we forward to. Again, the same email, the open source tech training email. And then we go through the sheet, and then for anything that will send a new response, every time there's a new information given, what this does is essentially provide the information from the response and then send information about it. So let's look back at this sheet. Okay, I think I know what happened. So when we're going through this, we're gonna... What this does and how you access it is every time you have a Google Sheet, you can set up under Tools, there's a script editor. That's this page. So inside the script editor, you can write pretty much any script that you want. There's a lot of things that you can do. If we were to go through and run a macro, record a macro, you're basically recording all the motions that you do until you stop recording that macro, and it will create another script as well. For this particular script, what we're doing is we're going to create a mail alert, and that goes over here using this function mail app send email. This will send an email using your mail address every time someone fills out a form. And there's a couple of steps to get to this. So what we first do is we have a function, and you could call this function pretty much anything. If you create a new script file or something like that, it will automatically create a function name. Once you're prompted, you enter a name for the new file, and it will create a new function based on that name. Once you have this function here, it looks a lot like JavaScript for those of you who are familiar with that, because it's kind of based upon JavaScript, but has a lot of Google APIs, or sort of these software development packages which allow for enhanced productivity and enhanced functionality within the sheet. So you can see here that the API are these function calls which are set up in Google Docs, like spreadsheet app, get active spreadsheet, get sheet by name, form responses 1. So we can see this form responses 1 here. What this does is it collects the data from this sheet. Okay. Then what we're doing is we're getting a range of data. So we're basically setting, okay, this is the sheet that we want. This is the data that we want. So we're getting a range from row 2, column 1, to row 1000, column 12. We're getting information from this extent of data within this sheet, and obviously we're nowhere near in responses yet, so this is a pretty safe value for now. And the values, we want to actually get the values from this data set, so we're not just getting the data itself, there's also a values component. This is the numbers inside of those cells, so we have get values. And then here we're creating another variable called email. This is just the contact email. You could set this as whatever you want. You're essentially saying this variable, if every time we use this email as a variable in the below code, it's going to be equal to this email address right here. So it just saves us having to retype the email address later. Now what we're going to do is we have all the values for all this data. It's all in a set of backend arrays that you can't see, and we're going to iterate over that. We're gonna go through each one of these rows step by step so that we can actually get the values for all of this. So for we're setting a new variable called I. So for when I equals 0 until I is below values.length. Values.length is this data of values. So this essentially is going to give us, per the number of rows or per the number of data sets or rows inside the sheet. And then we're going to gradually progress. So plus plus I. So we're going to keep going one by one through all these rows. Then we have this variable row. We want to define the row. So the values that we collected, now that we're getting this by I, we're going to take these values and we're going to go through them. The specific row that we're going to be looking at is this array of values at I. So this is probably a little bit complicated for people who don't have a lot of programming experience. Honestly, I'm working off a template, and I will try to include that link to that template. This is originally from the Google Docs page, but what this essentially does is once we have this, this overarching large matrix of values that we have, all the data essentially that we're pulling from this active spreadsheet and data that we're getting, we're iterating over it. So as we go from like 0 to 1 to 2. All of these things happen within this for loop. So for I equals 0, and then it'll do all this stuff, and then it'll go to the next row, and then it will do all this stuff again. Then it will go to the next row, and it will do all this stuff again, etc. The variable row, or the current row that we're looking at, is going to be whatever iteration of I we happen to be on. So the first time this runs, this will be 0. The second time this runs, this will be 1. The third time it runs, it'll be 2, etc. So it goes slowly through all of the rows that we're collecting from the values of this get values tab. Then what we're doing is we're collecting variables for each one of these rows. So we have an array which is essentially going down the table. That's the values. Then we have another array of values which are going across or horizontally through the rows. So we're getting the time. The time is row 0. This is where we look at the table. We say, okay, the first row of this, we start at 0 and start counting up from there. So this is the timestamp. So we have time. Then we have the question. That's the next row. So this would be the column 2, row array, and then this assigning goes to, we're going to collect the data from the second column. So sorry about that. So from here, it would be, what can we help you with? It would be this B column, etc. So get the details. This goes to the third one. And then we have this other variable. This essentially is a, as shown here in the comment, is a marker that prevents duplicate emails. So once this successfully runs, once we run this script, then this mail sent will go out. And it's over in column 9. So we have this sent thing. This is very important. So it's not any sort of usable data, but essentially this is acting as a flag, just to show that we've already sent a mail about this specific bit of information. And what that does is, we'll see in a minute, that once we set a trigger for the script to run, we want to make sure that new information that's coming into us we're not getting repeated information. So if we don't have this sent column, or you could write anything. You could have it like as a 1, as an A or letter or whatever. It's just, is it there or not? If this is there, then we run the script, then we send the email. If this is a blank field and we get something in, what we're going to do is we're going to set it up so that every time someone submits a new form, we run through the whole sheet and then send an email for anything that's not already sent. So what we do is we collect the information. This is an if statement. We're just sending if we have the question and it's not blank. So exclamation point equals means not equals blank because I'm defining this this parameter as blank. And if mail sent, this row 9 of that row, or column 9 of this row, is blank, then what we do is we send a message. It says a new contact request was filled out. This /n, this essentially is a new line. It's used in a lot of programming language. This is the JavaScript format. This creates a new line so that when we get the email, and we'll show it in just a sec, that I'll get the question, what were they asking? We'll get the details of it. And we can also, because we actually also added an email parameter related to this, the email address, is what we can do is in here, get another email. And we can add that detail to this bit of code, or what the message will say. So we'll add another new line. So what you just saw me type there was everything in the quotes here is the text that goes into this new variable message. This text inside the quotes, you can break it up and insert other variables so that you can concatenate, or you can combine the text with variable values by splitting it. So we have quotes here. Break the quotes. At a plus, you can add the value of this particular variable, and that's a variable that we're pulling from here. This is the row column 3, but again, we start at 0, so it's actually the 4th column. So you can see here 1, 2, 3, 4. This would be the email address. So we would essentially get this email address in the response to the mail. And then similar things for the other values that we're pushing into the email message. Then we're calling this function. This function is, again, a little bit of the part of the Google APIs. Let me save the code. And we get this sheet get range set value sent. So that allows us to run it. So what we can do now is we can run the function for all the variables that weren't sent here. So let's just see if this works. Okay, we didn't get any error message, so by all accounts it should work. I do have these 2 new requests. They're coming from myself, because I'm the user of this particular account. So it's sending this from the open source tech training email address. So you got this email from the user account. And again, you could set this to like a generic account if you wanted the generic account to send out these email addresses, but you would get the information from the Google form that we filled out. So the first initial message, the new request was filled out. This is the contact info of the person. This is the question. They're looking to order some beans. They need 1 pound of Blue Mountain beans. And then from there, you can, click on the address of the person. You can respond to them. You can, work out exactly what they need and where they're going to get it, etc. You can handle all that stuff. You could also, add this into the form. So again, here on the coffee shop page, we only have a couple of fields, but you could always add questions and adjust the form parameters so that you can customize and, essentially do whatever you want. And then through the power scripting, you then get, essentially live data from whoever was looking to create this kind of information. So let's go back to the code. Now, the only issue was, and you saw it and I had forgotten about it, the form didn't automatically do this. When the user submitted the form, I was not notified. And I had to set up the notification, and then I got the standard notification from Google Docs saying a user modified this, and then you can click here and see what the information is. This is a couple of, this is the easiest way to do it. It's perfectly valid. It requires an extra couple of clicks, and it's not, for anyone who may not have access to this particular document, they wouldn't be able to view the information. Whereas by scripting it, you could set up, like you could have a system admin who's the owner of the script and the owner of the information, and then because you define which email address this goes to, you could have someone maybe in customer support who then gets the initial email from the form itself. So there's a way to automate and tier who's doing what specific tasks. Whereas if you're only setting up the notification, pretty much you can only get the notification for the owner of this particular document. So there's a level of flexibility that you get by actually scripting it out. But again, so what you can do is you can set up a ton of tasks. You can do an amazing amount of stuff by using Google Forms and scripting all of these values. But let's automate it so that when a user submits a form, we'll get a response. So what you do is you go into the edit for the script, go to the current project triggers, inside here we can add a trigger. So we can say, okay, yes, what function do we want to run? Google is smart enough that it knows that we only have one function, so it defaults to that function. Source from the spreadsheet. We can say okay, and then we can select event type on form submit. So what this is going to do is anytime someone submits a form, we're going to run the script. And so by doing that, you're essentially setting up real-time alerts. So I think I want to set it up notify me immediately. This is for the failures. Select the deployment, should run, head, yes, okay. I think everything else looks fine. We'll save that. It'll ask you to verify. Again, because this isn't a Google script, so because I'm creating it, or essentially you would be creating it, it would be safe, but Google always wants to make sure. So by default, if there's any script which isn't registered or something that they've safely verified, they'll say, they'll issue this warning. So it tells you exactly what the app can do, and say, okay, I trust the contact because I created the contact and the software. So then we set this up. Okay, so we have this now. So it's this content is owned by me. It's going to send out this form. And here inside the triggers in this app script notification is where Google will give you a little bit of analytics in case it doesn't work or it fails. Very good for debugging, particularly because sometimes things change either on the Google side, or you add some code and it's actually not debugged and you don't test it properly. So that you can also view the triggers. Every now and then, also, I think it might be a little bit of permissions issues in Google backend, but if you do run this over time, occasionally, something which runs fine for, say, a few months, may all of a sudden work in case there's like an update from Google side, you need to sort of recreate it a little bit or reset the trigger. But it's few and far between. So now this is set, we can go back to the website and we can set up the form again. Yeah, so something ridiculous for this fictional website, but hopefully we'll get the idea. And then once that goes out, you see here, we'll get a new contact request. So it comes straight into the inbox. So again, I wanted this to be a very quick, very simple video. I hope we achieve that. It's just a very basic introduction into Google Forms and how to handle the scripting. how to set up the triggers and the animation for all of this. Again, this is a very basic script. You can do a near infinite number of things with Google Sheets, like copying things from one value to another value, setting macros. It's a very flexible program, and what I found to be one of the most helpful is kind of tasks, because if you were to set up a form like using HTML and PHP or JavaScript or something, you would also need to think about the backend web server. You need to think about a whole bunch of other things. So I know there's plenty of tools out there which other companies have provided. This one has just been something which works really well for me. I do want to say one last thing is that this type of form is not the same as running like a functional, like full-fledged website. So for example, if you're looking at setting up marketing content or advertising or anything which may some users may consider to be spam, you do need to be wary of things like the GDPR, right of access to data for the subject. There's a lot of laws which are coming into effect about how you manage and how you view personal information. So you do have to be mindful about this. The nice thing about having a form like this is, even though my website is not secure, the information which is inserted into this form is actually being inserted into Google. So you will have, some of the basic TPS and SSL restrictions. The information isn't going straight from here to my own database, which doesn't have the SSL certification. It's going to something which is a secure database on Google. But again, all the information does go to Google. So even though you're reacting to this information, all of this is still in the Google Cloud. So you have to make sure that you're comfortable with this and it's something which would work for your use case. I think for particularly anything which isn't maybe like monetary content, like you would never ask users to enter credit card numbers or something on this, but you would potentially, if you're just doing like a random survey. I mean, there's nothing simpler than just creating a quick Google form, or you're just asking for some contact information, then you can handle the other payment methods and so on offline. That should be more than fine, per my knowledge. And then, but again, if you're doing something like setting up a real business, please be wary of things like GDPR. This is the European regulations, which are probably the most stringent right at the moment. The US FCC also has a lot of rules and regulations that people should be mindful of in terms of managing and hosting uh, people's private information, which can include things like email or phone numbers. So just be mindful of that. It's Google Forms, and embedding forms into a website isn't a panacea. It's not going to solve all of your problems, but for someone who's doing like really basic web development, or they're just trying to get themselves off the ground and they want to collect things like surveys or some information around that, it should be a quick and easy way to get basic information, get yourself up and running, until you need to expand and do more other kinds of things, in which case you might be looking at something like an Amazon platform or eBay, or some kind of plug-in integration with PayPal, or et cetera, to manage things like payments. Um, but I hope it's a good overview and lets people understand a little bit of what you can actually do with Google Forms and the scripting functionality. So thank you again for your time.